The morning sun of Kepler Station cast long shadows through the reinforced transparisteel windows of Combat Hall 3. 300 cadets from across the galaxy stood in perfect formation, their varied physiologies creating a tapestry of scales, fur, chitin, and skin. At the far end of the third row, a lone human stood motionless, her breathing so controlled it barely disturbed the fabric of her gray uniform. Cadet Ren Hale kept her eyes forward, watching Instructor Vector pace before them, with his forearms clasped behind his reptilian back. The Draconis instructor's tail scraped against the polished floor with each step, a sound that made several avian cadets shift nervously. Ren didn't move. She'd learned in her first week that stillness was her best camouflage in a room full of predators. "Today marks your midterm evaluation in advanced close combat," Vector announced, his voice carrying the distinctive dual-tone harmonics of his species. "You will demonstrate proficiency in subduing opponents of different physiological classifications. As always, lethal force is prohibited." A ripple of anticipation passed through the ranks. Ren felt rather than saw the sideways glances from her neighbors. She'd maintained perfectly average scores all semester, careful never to stand out, never to remind them what humans were capable of. The other species had their own myths about Earth, whispered in dormitories and mess halls. Deathworld, gravity prison, the planet that ate its children and spat out monsters. "Pairings have been randomized by the Academy's matching algorithm," Vector continued, his yellow eyes scanning the formation. "When your name is called, step forward." The first dozen pairs were predictable, comparable size, similar combat ratings, complementary species matchups that would provide educational value without excessive risk. Ren watched a Thraxian cadet's antennae twitch nervously as they were paired with a heavily armored Gorvac. Fair enough match, she thought. The Thraxian's speed against the Gorvac's durability would make for an interesting demonstration. "Cadet Ren Hale," Vector called out. Ren stepped forward, maintaining the same measured pace she'd used all semester. Not too fast, not too slow. Just another mediocre human trying to graduate without incident. The hall fell silent, an unnatural quiet that pressed against her ears. Even the environmental systems seemed to pause their constant hum. "You will be paired with—" Vector paused, his head tilting as he reviewed his datapad. His tail stopped moving. "Cadet Zarakesh." The silence shattered into barely concealed gasps and whispers. Ren's expression didn't change, but her mind raced through the implications. Zarakesh, daughter of General Kraj, Supreme Commander of the Salkar warrior caste. The girl who'd broken 3 training partners in her first month. The untouchable princess of a species that had conquered 40 systems before humanity had even achieved faster-than-light travel. Across the hall, Zarakesh stepped forward. She moved with the fluid grace of her kind, her pale blue skin seeming to shimmer under the harsh training lights. The bone ridges along her skull had been decorated with ceremonial paint, marking her as warrior nobility. She stood a full head taller than Ren, her forearms hanging loose at her sides in a deceptive show of relaxation. "This can't be right," someone whispered behind Ren. "The human's combat rating is barely passing." "Maybe it's meant as an honor," another voice suggested. "Let the general's daughter have an easy victory for the midterm." Ren stepped onto the nearest combat circle, a 20-meter ring of shock-absorbing material designed to accommodate most known fighting styles. She rolled her shoulders once, the only sign of preparation she allowed herself. Zarakesh entered from the opposite side, and for the first time, their eyes met. The Salkar's pupils were vertical slits, like a cat's, set in irises the color of old ice. Ren saw the dismissal there, the casual contempt of a warrior facing what she assumed was prey. But there was something else, too. A flicker of confusion, perhaps even suspicion. Why would the Academy's algorithm pair its weakest human with Salkar royalty? "Combat rules are standard," Vector announced, though his voice carried an unusual tension. Victory by submission, incapacitation, or ring out. Medical teams are standing by. Begin on my signal. Ren shifted her weight minutely, centering herself. Around the ring, other cadets pressed closer, their scheduled matches forgotten. She could smell their anticipation, the chemical signatures of excitement and bloodlust that each species produced. Someone had started recording, the soft whir of a holocam adding to the ambient noise. "I'll make this quick," Zarakesh said, her voice carrying the melodic undertones that made Salkar interrogators so effective. "No need to embarrass your species more than necessary." Ren didn't respond. Words were wasted energy, and she'd need every joule for what was coming. Because as she settled into her stance, she noticed something the others had missed. 3 more Salkar cadets had moved to positions around the ring, not obviously threatening, just casually repositioning themselves to watch their princess fight. But their placement was too perfect, too strategic. This wasn't a random pairing. This was an ambush. Vektar raised one of his 4 arms. "Begin." Zarakesh moved first, as Ren had expected. The Salkar were bred for aggression, their neural pathways optimized for offensive action. She came in low and fast, using her lower arms for balance while the upper 2 reached for a grapple. It was textbook Salkar combat doctrine, the same technique that had conquered worlds. Ren stepped into the attack. To the observers, what happened next seemed impossible. The human's movement was so minimal, so efficient, that it barely registered as movement at all. She shifted 6 inches to the left, rotated her hips 15 degrees, and brought her right hand up in what looked like a gentle push against Zarakesh's leading wrist. The Salkar's momentum carried her past, suddenly off balance. Ren's left hand found the nerve cluster at the base of her opponent's secondary shoulder, applying precisely 17 pounds of pressure per square inch. Zarakesh's upper left arm went numb instantly. The bioelectric signals scrambled by targeted pressure that shouldn't have been possible for human fingers to achieve. "What?" Zarakesh began, but Ren was already moving. The human ducked under a wild swing from the Salkar's remaining upper arm, her motion flowing like water around stone. Her knee came up, not in a strike, but as a pivot point, allowing her to redirect Zarakesh's own momentum. The alien warrior stumbled, her usually perfect balance compromised by the dead weight of her paralyzed limb. That's when the other 3 made their move. They came from 3 cardinal points, abandoning all pretense of being mere spectators. The crowd erupted in shouts of alarm and excitement. This wasn't just against regulations. It was against every principle the Academy stood for. But Ren had seen it coming from the moment she'd stepped into the ring. The first attacker, a male Salkar with ritual scars covering his bone ridges, reached her in 2 seconds. He threw a devastating haymaker with his primary right arm, the kind of blow that could shatter most species' skulls. Ren didn't block it. Instead, she redirected it with the lightest touch of her fingertips against his forearm, using his own force to spin him directly into the path of the second attacker. The collision was spectacular. 200 kilograms of Salkar warrior crashed together with a sound like breaking timber. But Ren was already dealing with a third, a female whose painted markings identified her as Zarakesh's clutch sister. This one was smarter, coming in with a low tackle designed to use the Salkar's superior mass. Ren jumped. Not high humans couldn't match most species for vertical leap, but she jumped at exactly the right angle, tucking her knees to her chest as the Salkar passed beneath her. On the way down, she extended one leg, her heel finding the exact point where the Salkar's spinal cord entered the skull. The warrior collapsed instantly, her nervous system temporarily scrambled by a technique humans had developed to hunt persistence prey on the African savanna a million years ago. 4 seconds had elapsed since the ambush began. Zarakesh had recovered enough to rejoin the fight, her 3 functional arms working to compensate for the 4th. She came at Ren with renewed fury, abandoning technique for raw aggression. The human backpedaled, seeming to give ground, drawing her opponent forward. "Stand and fight," Zarakesh snarled, her honor demanding a proper confrontation. Ren's response was to drop to one knee, her hand slapping the mat. The Salkar princess saw the opening and lunged, all three arms reaching for what would be a fight-ending grapple. She never saw Ren's other hand moving, didn't notice the precise angle of the human shoulders. The throw was beautiful in its simplicity. Ren used Zarakesh's momentum, her own positioning, and the fundamental laws of physics to send 200 pounds of alien warrior sailing through the air. The Salkar hit the mat hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs in an explosive wheeze. 8 seconds. The two males had untangled themselves and were approaching more cautiously now. They split up, trying to flank her, using the tactical coordination that made Salkar infantry so feared. Ren stood slowly, her breathing still controlled, her heart rate barely elevated. She looked at each of them in turn, and something in her gaze made them hesitate. "You're not human," one of them growled. "Humans don't move like that." Ren tilted her head slightly, considering. Then she moved. The first male never saw the strike that dropped him. To the watching crowd, the human seemed to simply walk past him, her hand brushing his throat in what looked like an accidental contact. He collapsed 2 steps later, his larynx precisely compressed to trigger an involuntary knockout reflex. No permanent damage. But he wouldn't be getting up for several minutes. 10 seconds. The last standing Salkar, the one with the ritual scars, backed away. His forearms were raised in a defensive posture, his eyes wide with something that might have been fear. "What are you?" he demanded. Ren didn't answer. She walked toward him with the same measured pace she used in the corridors, the same unremarkable gait that had let her blend in for months. He threw a desperate combination of strikes, using all 4 arms in a pattern that should have been overwhelming. She flowed through them like smoke through a grid, where his fists passed. She wasn't. Where his grapples reached, she had already moved. And then, with a motion so subtle that the cameras would need slow-motion replay to catch it, she touched 2 fingers to a point just below his second left shoulder. The Salkar's entire left side went rigid, his balance destroyed. He toppled backwards, hitting the mat with a sound like a falling tree. He tried to rise, but his nervous system wouldn't respond properly, bioelectric signals misfiring in patterns his brain couldn't interpret. 12 seconds. 4 Salkar warriors down, 0 fatalities, minimal visible effort. The training hall erupted. Some cadets were shouting accusations of cheating, others demanding to know what combat form the human had used. A few, the more observant ones, had gone very quiet, their instincts recognizing what their conscious minds couldn't quite process. Ren walked to the center of the ring and helped Zarakesh sit up. The Salkar princess glared at her, fury and humiliation warring in her ice-blue eyes. "You've been holding back," she accused. "All semester. You've been pretending to be weak." "I've been trying to fit in," Ren corrected quietly. She glanced around the ring, noting the positions of the medical teams already moving in to check the fallen. "Your ambush was well coordinated. Your father would be proud." Zarakesh's eyes widened. "How did you—" "Instructor Vektar," Ren called out, her voice carrying clearly across the chaos. "I believe this evaluation is complete. May I be excused to medical for mandatory post-combat screening?" The Draconis instructor stood frozen at the edge of the ring, his datapad forgotten in one of his 4 hands. His tail had gone completely still, a sign of extreme stress in his species. "Cadet Hale," he managed. "That display. Those techniques. We're all non-lethal and within regulation parameters." Ren finished. "I can provide detailed analysis of each nerve strike and pressure point, if required for your report." "That won't be... that is..." Vector seemed to physically shake himself back to professionalism. Report to medical immediately, and then to the commandant's office. Ren nodded, stepped over the groaning form of the scarred Salkar, and walked toward the exit. Behind her, the hall exploded into chaos. Cadets were shouting, arguing, demanding explanations. Someone was already uploading the footage to the Academy's network, where it would spread like wildfire through the dormitories and common areas. As she reached the door, she heard Zarakesh's voice cutting through the noise. "Father was right," the Salkar princess said, though whether to herself or others, Ren couldn't tell. "The humans are hiding something." Ren paused at the threshold, considering. Then she kept walking. The medical check would find nothing unusual, elevated adrenaline. Perhaps, but within human norms. The commandant would have questions she couldn't answer, not without revealing truths that weren't hers to tell. In the end, she'd failed in her primary objective. She'd wanted to graduate quietly, to observe and learn without drawing attention. But the Salkar had forced her hand, and now the entire academy would be watching her, analyzing her, trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. They thought they wanted to know what humans were capable of, what Deathworld evolution could produce when pushed to its limits. But as Ren made her way through the sterile corridors toward the medical bay, she knew the truth was far more complicated. Humans weren't the monsters in this story. They were something far more dangerous, the ones who chose not to be monsters, despite having every capability to become them. And that contradiction, that careful balance between potential and restraint, was what truly terrified the galaxy. The medical bay doors hissed open before her. Dr. Thrain, a Novalian with bioluminescent skin, looked up from her workstation. "Cadet Hale, I wasn't expecting." She paused, her chromatophores flickering as she accessed the Academy network. Oh my, please, have a seat. I think we need to run some very thorough scans." Ren sat on the examination table, her posture perfect, her expression neutral. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear running feet and raised voices. Security. Probably. Maybe even intelligence. The footage would have reached the administration by now, and questions would be forming in minds trained to see threats and anomalies. But for now, in the quiet of the medical bay, Ren allowed herself one small smile. She'd held back for months, played the role of the struggling human cadet, endured the subtle condescension and not-so-subtle discrimination. And when pushed, when forced to defend herself, she'd still used only a fraction of what she was capable of. Because the scariest thing about humans wasn't their strength, or their endurance, or their predatory evolution. It was their choice. Every day, every moment, humans chose to be less than they could be. They chose civilization over savagery, cooperation over domination. But when that choice was taken away, when they were backed into corners and threatened, well, the galaxy was about to learn why Earth's children were so very careful about playing nice with others. The Strategic Command Center of Kepler Station had never hosted such a diverse gathering of military minds. The amphitheater-style room, designed to accommodate various physiologies, hummed with tension as footage played on the central holographic display. 23 seconds of combat footage, slowed to 1/10 speed, dissected frame by frame. Admiral Kess, a Therian, whose mane had gone silver with age, paused the playback at the moment Ren's fingers touched the first Salkar's nerve cluster. Computer, magnify Sector 4 and overlay anatomical mapping. The image expanded, revealing the precise point of contact. A red indicator showed where human fingers had found a vulnerability that most field medics couldn't locate without scanning equipment. The brachial nerve bundle sits 14 millimeters beneath the Salkar dermis at that location, Major Dakari observed, her insectoid head tilting to examine the image from multiple angles. The amount of pressure required to cause temporary paralysis would be 17.3 pounds per square inch, finished Captain Morris, the only other human in the room. His weathered face showed no emotion as he studied the screen. Assuming optimal angle of approach and accounting for the Salkar's natural bioelectric resistance. You knew, Admiral Kess stated, his amber eyes fixed on Morris. Your species has studied our anatomies. Morris shrugged, a uniquely human gesture that several species still found unsettling. We study everything. It's how we survived on Earth. Know your environment. Know your prey. Know your predators. Basic survival doctrine. But this level of precision, Dr. Yan interjected, her 6 eyes blinking in sequence as she processed the implications. This isn't military training. This is scholarly, medical. Each strike targeted a different species-specific vulnerability. She disabled 4 distinct physiological systems in 12 seconds. The room fell silent as the weight of that statement settled. On the screen, Ren's image frozen mid-motion, her expression calm despite being outnumbered 4-1. Play Sequence 7 again, General Crash commanded from his position near the back of the amphitheater. The Salkar commander had remained silent through most of the analysis. His 4 arms crossed over his massive chest. The throw. The hologram reset, showing Ren dropping to one knee as Zarakesh lunged forward. Frame by frame, they watched the human redirect 200 pounds of charging warrior with minimal effort. Aikido, Captain Morris supplied. Ancient Earth martial art. Use the opponent's force against them. Minimum effort, maximum efficiency. Your cadet has been deceiving us. General Crash's voice carried the harmonic undertones of barely controlled anger. She's operated under false pretenses, hiding combat capabilities that should have been declared upon enrollment. Has she Admiral Kess challenged? Computer, display Cadet Hale's training records. A new hologram materialized, showing months of performance data. Combat scores hovering just above passing. Endurance tests completed, but never excelled. Tactical simulations solved with competent but unremarkable solutions. It was the record of a thoroughly average student. Now overlay her biometric data from those same sessions, the Admiral continued. The display updated. Heart rate, neural activity, muscle tension, metabolic indicators all captured by the Academy's monitoring systems. The room went quiet again as the implications became clear. She never exceeded 40% metabolic capacity, Dr. Yan whispered. Not once, even during the final combat exam. Her heart rate never rose above 100 beats per minute. She's been performing within a self-imposed limitation, Major Dakari concluded, operating at a level just sufficient to pass without drawing attention. General Crash's tail lashed once, cracking against the floor. That's worse than deception. That's infiltration tactics. She's a spy. She's a student, Captain Morris countered. One who clearly wanted to complete her education without becoming a spectacle. Can you blame her, given how most species react to human capabilities? Show me the nerve strike mapping again, Dr. Yan requested, her clinical curiosity overriding the political tensions. All 4 targets, simultaneously. The display shifted to show 4 anatomical diagrams, each highlighting the precise point where Ren had struck. Salkar brachial plexus, laryngeal nerve cluster, lumbar ganglia, subcranial neural junction. 4 different species-specific vulnerabilities, each exploited with surgical precision. This is what troubles me, the doctor continued, gesturing with 2 of her 6 arms. These aren't standard combat targets. These are medical knowledge. The subcranial junction. For instance, I've performed surgery on that area. The margin for error between temporary paralysis and permanent damage is less than 2 millimeters. Yet she struck it perfectly, in motion, during combat. Species don't evolve that kind of precision, Major Dakari stated flatly. Not without specific selection pressure. What kind of environment produces predators who need to know exactly where to strike dozens of different anatomies? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Captain Morris shifted slightly, and every non-human in the room instinctively focused on him. "Earth," he said simply. "Specifically, Earth during the last ice age. Humans were persistence hunters. Yes. But we were also outnumbered, outmuscled, outfanged and outclawed by literally everything else. So we learned. Every animal we encountered, we memorized its weaknesses. Every predator that stalked us, we studied its patterns. We couldn't afford to just know how to kill. We needed to know how to disable, how to discourage, how to redirect." He gestured at the frozen image of Ren. "That knowledge became instinct, encoded in our neural pathways through millions of years of evolution. We see a moving form, and our brains automatically calculate joint positions, balance points, vulnerable zones. It's not conscious, it's as natural as breathing." "You're saying all humans can do this?" Admiral Kess asked carefully. "I'm saying all humans have the potential," Morris clarified. "Most never develop it. Modern civilization doesn't require those skills. But someone like Cadet Hale, trained from childhood, raised in an environment that rewards precision over power." He shrugged again. The old instincts surfaced quickly. "Computer," General Crash commanded. "Access Earth military database. Search for correlation between Cadet Hale and any special operations programs." "Access denied," the computer responded. "Classification level insufficient." The general's 4 hands clenched simultaneously. "Admiral Kess, I formally request—" "Denied," the admiral interrupted. "Earth's military records are protected under Treaty Section 9. However," he turned to Captain Morris, "perhaps you could illuminate us about these epitaph cadets. I've been hearing whispers about—" Morris went very still. It was a different kind of stillness than Ren had displayed, not the readiness of a predator, but the caution of someone who'd just stepped into a minefield. "I'm not familiar with that program," he said carefully. "No." Dr. Yayen pulled up another display. "Because I've been examining Cadet Hale's medical records with proper authorization. Of course. Her baseline readings are unusual. Bone density 12% above human normal. Reaction time in the 99th percentile. But most interesting is this." She highlighted a section of brain scan data. Hippocampal structures showing signs of accelerated development, enlarged amygdala, hyperdeveloped motor cortex. "These aren't natural variations, Captain. These are the results of deliberate neurological enhancement during developmental years." "Many Earth children receive educational enhancements," Morris replied. "It's not illegal." "Educational enhancements don't produce this," General Crash interjected, pulling up his own data. "My intelligence network has been investigating. 5 years ago, a transport ship arrived at Kepler Station carrying 143 human children, all orphans, all between the ages of 14 and 16, all with records beginning exactly 6 months before departure." He leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the holographic displays. 143 children with no past, Captain. And now we have one of them dismantling my best warriors like she's conducting a training exercise. So I ask again, what are the epitaph cadets? The silence stretched until Admiral Kess broke it. "Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle. Computer, display all available footage of Cadet Hale from the past semester." Hours of recordings began playing simultaneously on multiple screens. Ren in the mess hall, carefully measuring her food portions. Ren in study groups, contributing just enough to seem engaged. Ren in combat training, always performing exactly 3% above the minimum required standard. "There," Dr. Yayen pointed at one screen. "Freeze that image. Enhance grid reference 2.4. The image showed Ren in the library, working on what appeared to be complex mathematical equations. But as the enhancement clarified, they could see what she was actually writing stellar coordinates, calculated by hand without any computational assistance. "She's computing galactic positions using dead reckoning," Major Dakari observed, her antennae twitching with interest. That's not possible for human cognitive architecture. Run pattern analysis on those coordinates, Admiral Kess ordered. The computer processed for several seconds before responding. Coordinates correspond to no known stellar configurations. However, trajectory analysis suggests a search pattern centered on the Perseus arm. Sector designation classified above current authorization level. The dead zones, Dr. Yayan breathed. She's calculating positions in the dead zones. Why would a student need to know? An alarm klaxon cut through the discussion. Red lighting bathed the command center as the main display switched to an emergency broadcast. Priority alert from Solari Research Station Omega, the computer announced. Total communication blackout following unidentified contact event. Final transmission included partial biometric data of unknown origin. Admiral Kess was already moving. Display the biometric signature. The screen filled with cascading data energy readings, molecular structures, partial DNA sequences that seemed to shift and change even as they watched. Several officers stepped back instinctively, recognizing something fundamentally wrong about what they were seeing. That's not possible, Dr. Yayan stated, her 6 eyes wide with shock. Those protein structures, they're shifting between states. No known biological system can maintain quantum superposition at that scale. Computer, General Kraj commanded, his voice steady despite the alarm. Compare this signature to any entries in the restricted archaeological database. Accessing. Partial match found. Similarity to artifacts discovered in Dead Zone excavation site Prime 7. Classification extinct biosynthetic organism designated First Dawn by research team. Warning: all data regarding First Dawn requires Omega-level clearance. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Officers began issuing orders, preparing response teams, accessing what limited data their clearances allowed. But Captain Morris remained focused on the display showing Wren's handwritten calculations. She knew, he said quietly, though his words carried to Admiral Kess. Somehow, she knew this was coming. Captain, the Admiral's voice was dangerously level. I'm elevating this to a full military inquiry. You have exactly 1 minute to tell me what you know about Cadet Hale, before I have you detained for suspected treason. Morris looked at the calculations again, then at the biometric data of the impossible organism that had just destroyed a research station. When he spoke, his words were carefully chosen. 40 years ago, Earth's deep space monitoring stations detected an anomaly, a signal from the dead zones that matched no known phenomenon. The science team that investigated found something that challenged everything we thought we knew about evolution, about extinction, about the Fermi paradox itself. He paused, meeting the Admiral's fierce gaze. They found evidence that we weren't the first intelligent species to evolve past our homeworld's limitations. And more importantly, they found evidence of what happened to the ones who came before. The First Dawn, General Kraj concluded. Morris nodded slowly. The First Dawn, a biosynthetic species that achieved technological singularity through biological rather than mechanical means. They spread across the galaxy like a virus, consuming and converting all biological matter into more of themselves, until something stopped them. What stopped them? Dr. Yayan asked, though she seemed afraid of the answer. They did, Morris replied. A faction within their own species developed what we might call a conscience. They created a weapon that could destroy their own kind, a biological kill switch. The war that followed sterilized entire sectors of the galaxy. What we call the dead zones are their graveyards. Admiral Kess processed this information with remarkable calm. And the epitaph cadets? Insurance, Morris admitted. Earth's government knew that eventually someone would stumble onto First Dawn technology, would try to reactivate it. So they created a program, selected children with specific genetic markers, enhanced their capabilities, and trained them to recognize and respond to First Dawn signatures. Living weapons, General Crash spat. You turned children into living weapons. We turned children into guardians, Morris corrected. Ones who could make the same choice the First Dawn faction made to preserve life, rather than consume it. Cadet Hale isn't here to spy on you, General. She's here because Earth's monitoring stations detected activation signatures in this sector 6 months ago. She's been calculating search patterns, trying to locate the source before another alarm cut him off. This time, the display showed Kepler Station's own sensor data. Something was approaching from the direction of the destroyed research station. Something that defied conventional scanning techniques. All command staff to battle stations, Admiral Kess ordered. Captain Morris, you're with me. Someone get Cadet Hale to Strategic Command immediately. As the room erupted into motion, General Crash remained still for a moment longer, studying the image of his daughter being thrown by a human girl who could have killed her in a dozen different ways, but chose not to. Species don't evolve like that, he murmured, repeating Major Dakari's earlier words. But now he understood the truth. Humans hadn't evolved to be perfect predators. They'd evolved to be something far more dangerous. They'd evolved to choose. The isolation cell in Kepler Station's security wing was designed to hold the galaxy's most dangerous individuals. Walls of reinforced titanium carbide composite, energy-dampening fields, and constant surveillance from multiple spectrums. It had held war criminals, terrorist masterminds, and once, a Gorvak berserker who'd killed 32 guards during a psychotic break. Ren Hale sat in the center of the cell, cross-legged on the floor, working on calculations with a stylus and digital pad they'd reluctantly provided. She hadn't protested the detention, hadn't demanded legal representation, hadn't done anything except request star charts and computational tools. For 16 hours, she'd done nothing but write equations that hurt to look at. Outside the cell, Professor Thalen watched through the one-way barrier, his Solari physiology allowing him to process information at rates that would burn out most organic brains. The elderly academic's crystalline skin pulsed with soft bioluminescence as he studied Ren's work through the security feed. She's not trying to escape, he told Commander Resk, the station's security chief. She's not even acknowledging the detention. Look at her pupil dilation, her breathing patterns. She's completely focused on those calculations. Resk, a battle-scarred Draken whose scales had seen better days, snorted. Maybe it's an act. Humans are good at deception. No, Thalen disagreed, his harmonious voice carrying absolute certainty. I've been watching her for 9 hours straight. She's made over 12,000 individual calculations, each building on the last. This isn't performance. This is obsession. On the monitor, Ren paused in her work, tilting her head as if listening to something only she could hear. Then she spoke, her voice calm and clear, despite not looking up from her equations. Professor Thalen, I know you're watching. Could you please verify equation set 43 through 47? I think I made an error in the gravitational lensing compensation, but I need someone with eidetic memory to confirm. Resk's hand moved to his weapon. How did she know? Peace, Thalen said, already moving to the cell's communication panel. She's right. I am the only one on station with the capacity to verify calculations of this complexity in real time. He activated the intercom. Cadet Hale, I'll need to see the full equation set. Ren held up her pad to the camera, displaying rows of calculations that seemed to twist and curve in ways that violated conventional mathematics. Thalen's crystal skin flared brighter as he processed the information, his mind racing through the implications. By the first songs, he whispered, she's calculating probability cascades across dimensional boundaries. This is theoretical mathematics that won't be discovered for another century. What's she looking for? Resk demanded. Thalen was quiet for a long moment, his skin cycling through color patterns that indicated deep distress. She's tracking something moving through folded space, something that exists partially in our dimension and partially elsewhere. Commander, I need to speak with her directly. Absolutely not, Resk growled. She's in isolation pending. Commander, Ren interrupted through the intercom, still not looking up from her work. In approximately 6 hours, something is going to emerge from fold space at these coordinates. She held up another page of calculations. When it does, Kepler Station and everyone on it will have about 90 seconds before cellular cohesion begins to break down. I'm trying to find a way to prevent that, but I need Professor Thalen's help. Resk looked at Thalen, who was already studying the new calculations with growing alarm. Is she serious? She's tracking quantum probability threads, Thalen said slowly. Mapping potential emergence points for something traveling through dimensions we can barely conceptualize. If these calculations are correct, they're correct, Ren said simply. Professor, equation set 43. You forgot to account for temporal dilation in the third subset, Thalen replied automatically, his mind still reeling. The error compounds through the next 4 equations. Thank you. Ren immediately began corrections, her hand moving with mechanical precision. Commander Resk, I know you have protocols to follow, but if you check your communication logs from 6 months ago, you'll find a priority message from Earth Defense Command with authentication code Whisper 7 Actual. That message contained contingency instructions for exactly this scenario. Resk's scales shifted color, a sign of agitation. How could you possibly know about classified communications? For the first time since her detention, Ren looked up from her calculations. Her dark eyes met the camera directly, and something in her gaze made even the hardened security chief step back. Because I helped write them, she said. My name isn't really Ren Hale. It's Ren Epitaph 43. I'm one of 143 children specifically prepared for this moment. And right now, I'm the only thing standing between this station and something that shouldn't exist. The security office erupted as Resk's staff scrambled to verify her claims. Within minutes, they'd located the message buried in encrypted files that required Admiral-level authorization to access. As the authentication codes verified, Resk's expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching fear. Get Admiral Kess, he ordered, and open the cell. Thalen was already moving, his Solari metabolism allowing him to process the situation faster than the others. As the energy barriers dropped, he entered the cell without hesitation, his crystalline form humming with harmonic frequencies that indicated extreme stress. Show me everything, he said simply. Ren handed him stack after stack of calculations, each page containing work that would take most mathematicians weeks to complete. It started 6 months ago, she explained as he read. Earth's deep space monitors detected an anomaly in the quantum foam. Something moving with purpose, following patterns that matched First Dawn behavioral models. The First Dawn were destroyed, Thalen stated, though his tone suggested uncertainty. The First Dawn were contained, Ren corrected. The faction that developed the kill switch didn't destroy their species, they trapped them. Locked them in a dimensional pocket where time moves differently. But the barriers were never meant to last forever. She pulled up a new display, showing stellar positions that hurt to look at directly. Every 50,000 years, galactic alignment creates weakness in the dimensional walls. The last time it happened, there was no spacefaring civilization to notice. This time we've been poking at their ruins, Thalen concluded, his skin pulsing with patterns of understanding. The research station. They found something. They found a beacon, Ren confirmed. Dormant First Dawn technology that activated when exposed to modern energy signatures. It sent a signal through the dimensional barriers, and something heard it. The professor's 6 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed the implications. Your calculations. You're not tracking one entity. You're tracking dozens. 116, at current count, Ren said quietly. Scout forms, mostly. But if they establish a stable breach, if they can widen the dimensional aperture, the entire First Dawn civilization could return. Thalen finished. A species that consumes biological matter and converts it to their own use. A species that nearly sterilized the galaxy before. A species that evolved beyond physical limitations, Ren added. They exist as living information, capable of rewriting matter at the quantum level. Our weapons, our defenses, our very bodies, all just raw material to them. Thalen set down the calculations, his harmonious voice dropping to barely audible frequencies. Why didn't Earth warn us? Why send children instead of fleets? Ren's expression softened slightly, showing the first real emotion she displayed since the combat evaluation. Because fleets would have triggered panic, arms races, political complications that would have delayed response time, and because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Because adults think in terms of victory and defeat. The Epitaph program selected children who could think in terms of survival and sacrifice. You're expendable, Thalen realized. All of you, sent out to die if necessary, as long as you stop the breach. We're adaptive, Ren corrected. Trained from childhood to recognize First Dawn signatures, to think in their dimensional mathematics, to find solutions that conventional military doctrine would never consider. Each of us was placed at a strategic location where emergence was probable. I drew Kepler Station. And the others? Dead, successful, or still waiting, Ren said simply. Epitaph 16 prevented a breach in the Vegan system 2 years ago. Cost her life, but she sealed the aperture. Epitaph 89 is still monitoring the Centauri Nexus. We don't communicate directly, too much risk of detection. The door to the security center hissed open, admitting Admiral Kess, General Kraj, and a contingent of senior officers. The Admiral's expression was carefully neutral, but his body language screamed tension. Cadet. Epitaph 43, he said carefully. I've reviewed the authentication codes. Earth Defense Command has granted you temporary field authority for this situation. What do you need? Ren stood smoothly. 16 hours of sitting hadn't stiffened her muscles at all. First, I need access to the station's main sensor array. I have to refine my calculations with real-time data. Second, I need a team of your best physicists and engineers. We have less than 6 hours to either reinforce dimensional barriers or evacuate the station. Evacuate. General Kraj's tail lashed. This is a military installation with 50,000 personnel. We don't run from threats. General. Ren met his four-eyed gaze steadily. Your daughter hit me with enough force to shatter granite. In our sparring match, she was trying to kill me, whether she admits it or not, and I redirected that force without harming her. Do you know why? The Salkar general's forearms tensed. Explain. Because force against force is extinction thinking, Ren said. The First Dawn tried to dominate through consumption. They nearly succeeded. The faction that stopped them didn't win through superior firepower. They won by choosing a different path, by being willing to sacrifice themselves to save others. That's what humans learned on our Deathworld. Not how to be the strongest predator, but how to break the cycle of predation. She turned back to Admiral Kess. I can't stop what's coming with weapons, but I might be able to redirect it, seal the breach, give the galaxy time to prepare proper defenses. I need your trust and your resources, and I need them now. The room fell silent except for the hum of electronics and life support. Finally, Admiral Kess nodded. Professor Thalen, you'll oversee the science team. General Kraj, prepare evacuation procedures as a contingency. Commander Resk, give her anything she needs. As the officers moved to comply, Ren allowed herself a moment of something that might have been grief. Somewhere in the galaxy, Other epitaph cadets were probably facing similar moments. Children trained for extinction events, carrying the weight of species survival on shoulders too young for such burdens. But that was what Earth did, took its broken children and forged them into something unbreakable. Not through cruelty, but through purpose. Not through power, but through choice. Professor Thalen appeared at her elbow, his crystal skin humming with determination. Where do we start? Ren pulled up her calculations again. But this time, she included him in her process, explaining each step. We start by understanding what the first dawn really were. Not conquerors or monsters, but a species that achieved perfect unity at the cost of individual identity. They became a singular consciousness distributed across billions of bodies. Imagine having no self, no boundaries between you and your species. Perfect harmony, but also perfect hunger. They consumed others to add to their unity, Thalen extrapolated. Each new species absorbed would add to their collective knowledge and capability. Exactly. But the faction that rebelled, they remembered what it was like to be individuals. They chose death over eternal unity. They created the dimensional prison, not just to contain their species, but to preserve the concept of choice itself. Around them, the security center transformed into a makeshift command post. Scientists arrived with equipment, engineers began modifying sensor arrays, and military personnel prepared for an enemy they couldn't understand. But at the center of it all, a young woman who'd hidden her true nature for months finally showed what Earth's children were truly capable of. Not destruction, not domination, but the careful balance between power and restraint that evolution had written into human DNA over millions of years. The countdown continued, 5 hours, 37 minutes until emergence. Time enough to save the galaxy, if they were willing to pay the price. The modified sensor array painted a picture of space that shouldn't exist. Where normal instruments showed empty void, Ren's recalibrated systems revealed tears in reality itself, wounds in the fabric of space-time that pulsed with malevolent purpose. Professor Thalen stood beside her at the command console, his crystalline form resonating at frequencies that made nearby electronics whine in protest. There, Ren pointed at a confluence of probability streams. Primary emergence point in 4 hours, 12 minutes. But look at these secondary patterns. Thalen's 6 eyes tracked the data flows, his Solari brain processing information at superhuman speeds. They're not random, they're probing, testing our dimensional stability. Learning, Ren corrected grimly. The First Dawn aren't just breaking through, they're analyzing our space, understanding how physics works in our dimensional frame. Each probe gives them more data. Behind them, the command center had become a hive of frantic activity. Engineers worked to reinforce the station's shields with harmonics that might interfere with dimensional breaches. Scientists ran simulations that crashed their computers more often than not. And through it all, Admiral Kess maintained the steady calm that had seen him through a dozen military campaigns. Cadet Epitaph 43, he said formally, approaching their station. General Kraj has raised some concerns about your methods. Ren didn't turn from her calculations. Let me guess. He discovered I've been accessing restricted archaeological databases for the past 6 months. That I've been using Academy resources to track First Dawn signatures across 12 sectors. That I've been, technically, committing treason by not reporting my findings through proper channels. All of that, yes, the Admiral confirmed. He's demanding your immediate arrest once this crisis passes. If we survive this crisis, I'll turn myself in willingly. Ren replied, but right now, I need to tell you something about Earth's archaeological expedition 40 years ago. Something that wasn't in any official report. She pulled up a new display, showing a star map of the dead zones, vast sectors of space where no life existed, where even bacteria couldn't survive. The team that found the first Dawn ruins didn't just discover technology. They found records, memory crystals that stored consciousness itself. One of the archaeologists made the mistake of interfacing with them directly. Telepathic contact with an extinct species. Thalen's harmonic voice carried notes of horror. The psychological damage alone. She lived, Ren interrupted. Dr. Sarah Chen, my biological mother. She survived the contact, but she was changed. The memories she absorbed, the knowledge of what the first Dawn were, what they became. It drove her to create the Epitaph program. She knew they weren't truly gone, just waiting. Admiral Kess absorbed this information with professional calm. And she passed this knowledge to you, to all of us. Genetic markers that allow us to think in their mathematics. Neural conditioning that lets us perceive dimensional fluctuations. We're not quite human anymore, Admiral. We're what my mother thought humanity needed to survive what was coming. Abominations! General Kraj's voice cut through the discussion. The Salkar commander had arrived silently, his forearms crossed in a posture of barely controlled aggression. You admit to being genetically modified weapons. Ren finally turned to face him, and something in her expression made the warrior take an involuntary step back. General, your species prides itself on martial prowess. You've conquered systems through strength and honor. But what would you do if you faced an enemy that could rewrite your DNA with a thought that could turn your strongest warriors into raw material for their expansion? We would die fighting, Kraj declared without hesitation. Yes, Ren agreed. You would die, gloriously, honorably, and pointlessly. Because the First Dawn don't understand honor. They don't comprehend individual glory. They only understand consumption and conversion. Unless... She turned back to her displays, pulling up the footage from her combat evaluation, the image of her carefully redirecting Salkar warriors without causing permanent harm. Unless you show them something they've never encountered before. Strength that chooses not to destroy. Power that protects rather than consumes. You think philosophy will stop an invasion? Kraj's tail lashed dismissively. I think the faction that imprisoned the First Dawn understood something we're only beginning to grasp. Ren replied. They were part of the collective consciousness. They knew its thoughts, its hunger, its absolute certainty that consumption was the only path to perfection. And yet they chose differently. They chose to die as individuals rather than live as components of something greater. Professor Thalen's form suddenly flared with brilliant light. The memory crystals. Your mother didn't just absorb First Dawn knowledge, she absorbed the faction's memories. The ones who rebelled. Ren nodded slowly. And those memories taught her that the First Dawn's greatest weakness wasn't technological or biological. It was philosophical. They couldn't conceive of voluntary self-limitation, of choosing to be less than you could be. Like humans do every day, Admiral Kess said quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Like all sapient species do, Ren corrected. Every time you choose not to conquer a weaker civilization, every time you show mercy to a defeated enemy, every time you limit yourself for the greater good, you're proving that the First Dawn's path, total unity through consumption, isn't the only way to achieve greatness. An alarm pierced the discussion. On the main display, space itself seemed to ripple. The first major probe was beginning, reality bending in ways that made everyone in the room instinctively step back. 3 hours, 48 minutes ahead of schedule, Thalen reported, his voice tight with controlled fear. They're accelerating the timeline. Ren's hands flew across the controls, adjusting calculations, refining predictions. They sensed our preparations. They know we're aware of them. She paused, a thought occurring to her. Which means they're thinking, planning. They're not just a force of nature anymore, they're becoming individuals again. How is that possible? Admiral Kess demanded. Proximity to our dimension, Ren explained rapidly. The prison dimension forced them into unity, compressed their consciousness into a single mass. But as they push through into our space, they're experiencing separation, individual thoughts, choice. They're becoming people again, Thalen breathed. After 50,000 years of collective consciousness, they're remembering what it means to be alone. And that terrifies them, Ren concluded. Which makes them desperate, and desperate entities with the power to rewrite matter at the quantum level. She didn't need to finish. Everyone in the room could imagine the devastation a panicked First Dawn could cause. Options, Admiral Kess asked simply. Ren pulled up a schematic. She'd been working on a modification to the station's primary power core that looked more like abstract art than engineering. We can't fight them. We can't run from them. But we might be able to offer them something they want more than conquest. Which is a choice, Ren said. The same choice their faction made 50,000 years ago. The choice between unity and individuality. Between perfection and freedom. General Crash snorted. You want to negotiate with an extinction-level threat? I want to remind them that they were once people, Ren replied. That they had names, identities, dreams that didn't involve consuming everything in their path. The faction that imprisoned them didn't do it out of hatred, they did it out of love. Love for what their species had been before the unity consumed them. She turned to address the room at large, her voice carrying despite its quiet tone. I need volunteers. What I'm proposing, there's a significant chance it will kill everyone involved. We're going to create a localized dimensional bubble, a space where the First Dawn can exist without immediately consuming everything around them. A place where they can remember what it means to choose. And if they choose conquest, General Crash challenged, then we collapse the bubble and take them with us. Ren said simply, but I don't think they will. The faction's memories, the ones my mother absorbed, they speak of a species that created art, that loved their children, that dreamed of stars they would never reach. That's what was lost when they achieved unity. That's what some of them want back. Silence greeted her words. Then, unexpectedly, Zarakesh stepped forward from where she'd been observing with a group of cadets. The Salkar princess still moved carefully, one arm still showing signs of nerve damage from their fight. I volunteer, she said simply. Zara. General Krash's voice cracked like a whip. I forbid. Father, Zarakesh interrupted, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Ren. This human could have killed me in our match. She could have humiliated our entire species. Instead, she chose to disable without destroying, to teach without preaching. If that's not the warrior's way, then perhaps we need a new way. Others began stepping forward. Professor Thalen, his crystalline form pulsing with determined light. Commander Resk, scarred scales telling stories of battles survived. Engineers, scientists, even maintenance workers who understood only that the strange human girl was offering them a chance to save everyone. Admiral Kess surveyed the volunteers, then nodded slowly. What do you need? Ren felt something tight in her chest, an emotion she'd been trained to suppress, but couldn't quite eliminate. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe just the recognition that even across species, across worlds, people could choose to be more than their base programming. First, we need to modify the primary power core, she began, her voice shifting into the calm efficiency of someone trained for doomsday scenarios. The dimensional bubble requires massive energy input, but more importantly, it needs to be modulated at frequencies that resonate with First Dawn consciousness patterns. As she spoke, the room transformed from a military command center into something else. Not quite a war room, not quite a laboratory, but something uniquely suited to the impossible task ahead. Beings who had been strangers, even enemies, worked together with singular purpose. 2 hours until primary emergence. Time enough to save the galaxy, if they could remind an ancient horror what it meant to be human. or whatever the first dawn equivalent had been, before they'd traded their souls for perfection. In her mind, Ren could almost hear her mother's voice, transmitted through genetic memory and careful conditioning. The greatest strength isn't in what you can do, but in what you choose not to do. Remember that, my daughter. When the time comes, remember that even gods can choose to be mortal again. The work continued. The clock ticked down. And somewhere between dimensions, an ancient consciousness stirred, sensing something it hadn't felt in 50,000 years. The possibility of choice. The shuttle bay had been transformed into something that defied conventional understanding. Where launch platforms once stood, geometric patterns etched in exotic matter created a mandala of impossible complexity. The modified power core thrummed with harmonics that made teeth ache and vision blur. At the center of it all, Ren Hale stood with 37 volunteers, each wearing hastily modified environmental suits that might protect them from dimensional shear. "Final checks," Ren called out, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "Professor Thalen, dimensional resonance." The Solari's crystalline form pulsed as he reviewed readings that would have driven most minds to madness. "Stable at 93%. The quantum fluctuations are within acceptable parameters. Though I must note that acceptable is a relative term when discussing dimensional breach protocols." Commander Resk, structural integrity. The scarred Draken checked his displays with military precision. "Hull stress is approaching critical thresholds, but holding. The station can maintain this configuration for approximately 40 minutes before cascade failure begins." "More than enough time," Ren said. Though, privately, she wondered if 40 minutes or 40 years would make any difference against beings that existed outside conventional time. "Zara Kesh, your team." The Salkar princess stood with 12 other cadets from various species, all volunteers who had seen Ren's combat demonstration and understood they were following someone who could have dominated, but chose not to. "Ready. Epitaph 43. Though I still question the wisdom of bringing combat personnel to a philosophical engagement." "We're not bringing warriors," Ren corrected. "We're bringing witnesses. The First Dawn need to see that strength and restraint can coexist, that power doesn't require consumption." An alarm pierced the air. On the main display, space itself began to tear. Not the clean rifts of jump drives or warp fields, but ragged wounds that bled light in colors that shouldn't exist. Through those tears, something vast and terrible began to emerge. "Contact in 30 seconds, Admiral Kess announced from the command deck above. His voice carried across the comm system, reaching not just the volunteers, but the entire station. "All non-essential personnel to evacuation stations. This is not a drill." Ren closed her eyes, feeling the dimensional tremors through senses that her mother's modifications had granted her. The First Dawn weren't just coming, they were screaming. 50,000 years of compressed consciousness suddenly experiencing separation. Like a single voice, splitting into billions of discordant notes. "Remember," she said to her volunteers, "they're going to be confused, angry, terrified. They've been a collective for so long that individuality will feel like death to them. Our job is to show them it's not death, it's rebirth." "And if they prefer their current state?" General Crash asked. He'd refused to evacuate, standing with his daughter despite his earlier objections. "Then we give them what the original faction couldn't," Ren replied. "A clean ending. The dimensional bubble can be collapsed from inside. It will take all of us with it, but it will seal the breach permanently." The tears widened. Through them came something that defied description. Not ships or creatures, but concepts given form. Living mathematics that rewrote reality around them. Where they touched normal space, matter began to flow like water, restructuring itself according to alien geometries. "Activating the bubble," Ren announced, her hands flying across controls that had been jury-rigged from 17 different technologies. "Everyone inside the circle Now! The volunteers rushed to position as energy fields sparked to life around them. The bubble wasn't a shield in any conventional sense. It was a pocket of space with different rules. A place where thought and reality intersected more directly. Where the first dawn could exist without automatically consuming everything around them. The transition was jarring. One moment they stood in the shuttle bay. The next, they existed in a space that had too many dimensions and not enough at the same time. Colors had taste, sounds had texture, and thoughts became briefly visible before dissolving back into consciousness. And then they came. The first dawn flowed into the bubble like water into a vessel, their forms shifting between states: solid, liquid, energy, information. Up close, Ren could see what they had once been. Beneath the writhing mass of collective consciousness were traces of individuality. A shape that might have been a face. A pattern that could have been a name. Ghosts of the people they'd been before unity consumed them. One of the entities coalesced before her, taking a form that hurt to perceive directly. When it spoke, the words bypassed her ears and appeared directly in her mind. "What are you?" "I'm human," Ren replied, both aloud and through the dimensional interface her modifications allowed. "I'm what you used to be. An individual. A person with choice. Choice is inefficiency. Unity is perfection." "Unity is prison," Ren countered. She gestured to her volunteers, each standing firm despite the terror that must be coursing through them. "Look at us. Different species, different minds, different choices, but united by purpose, not consumption." The entity writhed, its form becoming more unstable. Other First Dawn pressed into the bubble, their collective voice rising to a crescendo that threatened to shatter minds. But Ren had been prepared for this her entire life. Her mother's memories, implanted at the genetic level, gave her insight into their psychology. "You remember," she said, projecting the thought with all the force her modified brain could muster. "Before the unity, before the hunger, you had names, you had children, you had art." "Lies only, unity only, hunger." "Then, why did some of you choose differently?" Ren challenged. "Why did the factions sacrifice themselves to stop you? They were part of your collective. They knew your thoughts, and they chose death over what you'd become." The entities paused, their forms rippling with something that might have been uncertainty. In that moment of hesitation, Ren played her final card, from her suit's storage compartment. She withdrew a crystal, one of the memory stores her mother had recovered from the First Dawn ruins. "This contains the thoughts of those who imprisoned you," she said, holding it up. The crystal pulsed with light that existed in too many spectrums. Not their anger or their fear, their love. Love for what you were, grief for what you became, hope for what you might be again. She activated the crystal. The effect was immediate and devastating. Memories flooded the bubble. Not human memories, but First Dawn experiences from before their transformation. A parent teaching a child to manipulate probability fields. Artists creating sculptures from folded space. Scientists discovering the mathematics that would eventually doom them. Love, joy, curiosity, wonder, all the emotions that unity had stripped away in favor of perfect efficiency. The First Dawn recoiled as if burned. Their collective voice fractured, individual tones emerging from the cacophony. "I remember. My name was... We were... What have we become?" The transformation was agonizing to watch. Beings that had existed as a single consciousness for millennia, suddenly experiencing individuality again. Some embraced it, their forms stabilizing into shapes that, while alien, showed personality and purpose. Others fought against it, trying to maintain the unity even as it slipped away. "It hurts," one of them managed, its form solidifying into something vaguely humanoid, though with too many angles and dimensions. "Being alone, it hurts." Yes, Ren agreed, stepping forward. Several volunteers moved to stop her, but she waved them back. It hurts, but it's real. It's choice. It's freedom. We were gods, another First Dawn moaned. We could reshape reality, consume galaxies. Now we're small, limited, mortal. You're alive, Zarakesh interjected, surprising everyone by stepping forward to stand beside Ren. The Salkar princess faced the ancient beings without flinching. My people value strength above all else, but strength without choice is just destruction. You chose unity once. Now you can choose something else. More volunteers stepped forward. Professor Thalen, his crystalline form resonating with harmonics that seemed to soothe the First Dawn's distress. Commander Resk, showing his scars without shame, proof that survival sometimes meant accepting wounds. One by one, they demonstrated what the First Dawn had forgotten, that limitation wasn't weakness, but the foundation of meaning. But not all the First Dawn were convinced. A massive entity, one that had resisted the separation more than others, surged forward. Its form was a roiling mass of hunger and rage, barely contained by conscious will. No unity is all consumption as purpose, you corrupt us with weakness. It lashed out, not with physical force, but with waves of probability that sought to unmake everything around it. Several volunteers screamed as their suit's protection wavered, reality trying to rewrite itself around them. Ren moved without thinking. The combat training that had let her disable 4 Salkar warriors flowed together with her mother's memories and her own understanding of dimensional physics. She didn't strike the entity, she redirected its force, just as she had in the combat evaluation. But this time, she redirected it inward, forcing the being to experience its own hunger turned upon itself. The entity convulsed, its form fragmenting. For a moment, Ren thought she had killed it. Then she saw what lay beneath the hunger, a consciousness so terrified of being alone that it would rather consume everything than face isolation. I understand, she said softly, reaching out with her mind to touch the fragmenting consciousness. You're afraid. Afraid of being small. Afraid of being forgotten. Afraid of death. Death is nothing, the entity managed. Loneliness is everything. Then don't be alone, Ren offered. Choose connection without consumption. Choose love without unity. Choose to be small and real, rather than vast and empty. The entity shuddered, its form continuing to fragment. But now, the fragmentation looked less like destruction and more like birth. Multiple smaller consciousnesses emerged from the mass, each blinking in confusion at their newfound individuality. Who am I? One of them asked. You're whoever you choose to be, Ren replied. That's the gift and the curse of individuality. You get to decide. Around them, more First Dawn were making similar choices. The bubble space filled with beings rediscovering themselves, remembering names unused for 50,000 years, experiencing emotions that unity had suppressed. It was chaotic, painful, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. But not all chose rebirth. A significant portion of the First Dawn, perhaps a third of those present, pulled back from the transformation. They huddled together, trying to maintain their collective state, even as individuality infected them like a virus. We will not become small, they declared in unison. We will not accept limitation. If we cannot have unity, we choose oblivion. They began to compress, their forms growing denser, darker. Ren recognized what was happening. They were initiating the same process the original faction had used to create the dimensional prison. Self-destruction, rather than acceptance of change. Stop, she called out. There's another way. No, General Crash interrupted, placing a hand on her shoulder. The Salkar warrior's expression was solemn, but understanding. You've shown them choice. This is theirs to make. Don't dishonor it by trying to force them." Ren wanted to argue, but she saw the wisdom in his words. Choice meant accepting that some would choose paths she couldn't save them from. The rebels had understood that 50,000 years ago. Now she had to understand it too. The self-destructing first dawn completed their compression, creating a singularity of consciousness that pulled at the fabric of the bubble. But instead of consuming everything around them, they turned the hunger inward, creating a perfect closed loop that gradually faded from existence. Their last message was a whisper across dimensions. We are not, we chose." Silence filled the bubble as the remaining first dawn absorbed what had happened. Those who had chosen individuality looked at each other with new eyes, or whatever sensory organs they were developing. The crisis had passed. But now came the harder question: what next? "You can't stay here," Ren said, addressing the reborn first dawn. "This bubble is temporary, but Earth has prepared places where you can exist without danger to others, while you rediscover what it means to be individuals." "Why would your species help us?" one of them asked. "We were going to consume you all." "Because that's what humans do," Professor Thalen interjected, his harmonic voice carrying notes of wonder. "They evolved not through domination, but through cooperation. They survived their death world by choosing to be more than predators." "And because," Ren added, 50,000 years ago, some of you chose to save the galaxy rather than rule it. We're just returning the favor." The First Dawn considered this. They looked at the volunteers' beings who had risked everything to offer them choice. They looked at each other, individuals where once there had been only unity. And one by one, they began to nod or gesture agreement in whatever ways their evolving forms allowed. "We accept," they said, not in unison but as a chorus of individual voices. "We choose to learn, to grow, to be small and real." Ren felt tension she hadn't realized she was carrying finally release. They'd done it. Not through force or technology, but through the simple act of showing another path. The same path humanity had walked when they chose civilization over savagery. "Bubble collapse in 5 minutes, Commander Resk reported. "We need to evacuate." As the volunteers and First Dawn prepared to leave the bubble space, General Crash approached Ren one final time. "I owe you an apology," he said formally. "I accused you of deception, of being a weapon. I failed to see that your greatest strength was in choosing not to use your full power." "We're all weapons, General," Ren replied. "Every thinking being has the capacity for destruction. What matters is what we choose to build instead." The Salkar warrior considered this, then offered something rare, a genuine smile. "My daughter chose well when she volunteered to follow you. Perhaps there are things even old warriors can learn." The bubble began to contract, reality reasserting itself. In minutes, they would be back in normal space, dealing with the aftermath of first contact with a species older than recorded history. There would be challenges, setbacks, fears to overcome. But for now, Ren allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd been trained as humanity's last hope, prepared to sacrifice everything to stop an extinction-level threat. Instead, she'd helped birth a new chapter in galactic history. Not through destruction, but through choice. Not as a weapon, but as a bridge. The bubble collapsed, returning them to the shuttle bay. Around them, alarms were silent, the dimensional tiers sealed. The First Dawn, who had chosen rebirth, stood awkwardly in normal space, their forms still shifting as they adapted to individuality. Admiral Kess's voice came over the comm system. "Well done, Epitaph 43. Earth Command is already preparing reception facilities. The galaxy owes you a debt." "The galaxy owes us nothing," Ren corrected. "We're all just people trying to make the right choices. That's what makes us human, or Salkar, or First Dawn, or whatever we choose to be." She looked at the beings around her, volunteers and ancients, warriors and scholars, all united by the simple act of choosing hope over fear. "Now comes the hard part," she said with a slight smile. "Teaching them how to be people again. Anyone know where we can find 50,000 years' worth of missed cultural development?" The tension broke as several volunteers laughed, a sound that the First Dawn watched with fascination, some attempting to replicate it with varying degrees of success. It was a small start, but every choice began with a single moment of decision. And in that moment, the galaxy had chosen to be more than the sum of its parts. 3 weeks had passed since the First Dawn crisis. Kepler Station bore the scars of dimensional stress walls that curved in impossible ways. Corridors where gravity flowed sideways. Sections where time moved just slightly out of sync. But life, as it always did, had adapted. Cadets attended classes around spatial anomalies. Engineers worked to repair reality itself. And in Conference Room Alpha, a gathering that would reshape galactic politics was about to begin. Ren Hale stood before the assembled leaders of 12 civilizations, no longer hiding behind the facade of a struggling cadet. She wore the simple black uniform of Earth's epitaph program, its only decoration, a small pin, showing a phoenix rising from mathematical equations. Beside her, 3 First Dawn entities maintained semi-stable forms, their appearance still shifting, but recognizably individual. "Thank you all for coming," Admiral Kess began, his weathered features showing the strain of recent events. "What we discuss today will determine the future of galactic civilization. Cadet, I apologize. Operative Epitaph 43 has prepared a presentation that I believe you all need to see." General Kraj sat in the Salkar delegation, his daughter Zarakesh beside him. The warrior's expression was unreadable, but his posture suggested someone re-evaluating fundamental beliefs. Across from them, Ambassador Teleria of the Novalian Collective Pulse, with bioluminescent patterns of deep concern. Representatives from the Therian Pride, the Draken Hegemony, and 8 other major powers filled the room with tension thick enough to taste. Ren activated the holographic display, showing a star map of the galaxy. Red zones marked the dead sectors. But now, new markings appeared, points of light in green and gold. "For the past 6 months," she began, "Earth has been monitoring dimensional instabilities across the galaxy. What we discovered challenged everything we thought we knew about the First Dawn extinction event." She paused, meeting the eyes of each delegation in turn. The First Dawn never went extinct. They were transformed, imprisoned, and waiting. But that's not the real revelation. The display shifted, showing data streams that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. 17 other Epitaph operatives have prevented similar breaches in the past 5 years. Each time, we found the same thing: First Dawn technology being accidentally activated by archaeological teams, mining operations, or stellar phenomena. The barriers between dimensions have been weakening. "You're saying this crisis was inevitable?" Ambassador Teleria's harmonic voice carried notes of accusation. "That Earth knew and said nothing." "Earth knew something was coming," Ren corrected. "We didn't know when or where. The Epitaph program was our attempt to prepare without causing galactic panic. 143 children, modified and trained to recognize and respond to First Dawn signatures, placed strategically across the galaxy." "Child soldiers," growled Hisktel, the reptilian representative of the Saurian Confederacy. "Bred for war." "Children given purpose," Ren countered. "Each of us volunteered after the initial modifications. We understood what we were accepting. The chance to prevent extinction, even at the cost of our own lives." One of the First Dawn entities stepped forward, its form stabilizing into something roughly humanoid, but with too many dimensions. When it spoke, its voice was like harmonized crystal. "If I may address the assembly," it said, the words careful and deliberate. I choose to be called Resonance now. Before Unity, my people were called the Veil Touched. We were explorers, scientists, dreamers. We sought perfection through unity, and found only hunger. The room fell silent as an entity older than recorded civilization continued. The human child. Ren showed us what we had forgotten. That strength lies not in consumption, but in choice. Not in unity, but in harmony. Your species, all of them, represent what we could have been. What some of us choose to become again. Pretty words, General Crash interjected. But how do we know this isn't another form of infiltration? A longer game to achieve the same consumption? Resonance's form rippled with what might have been amusement. General, if we wished to consume, we would have done so. Even diminished, even choosing individuality, we retain capabilities that could unmake your civilization. Observe. The entity gestured, and reality bent around its appendage. A cup of water on the table transformed into crystal, then gas, then pure energy, then back to water, all without spilling a drop. Several delegates recoiled at the casual display of power. We choose not to use this power for conquest. Resonance continued. That is the lesson the human taught us. That true evolution is not about capability, but about restraint. Ren took control of the presentation again. Which brings us to the real reason for this gathering. Earth's government has authorized me to reveal the full scope of the Epitaph program, not just its existence, but its true purpose. She touched a control, and the display showed images of all 143 Epitaph operatives, children and young adults from every corner of Earth, their faces showing the diversity of humanity. We weren't just trained to stop the first dawn, she said. We were trained to test whether the galaxy was ready for what comes next. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Ambassador Talaria's patterns shifted to deep ultraviolet, a sign of extreme alarm. What comes next? The first dawn were not the first civilization to achieve transcendence through unity. Ren explained. Our archaeological teams have found evidence of at least 7 precursor civilizations, each following the same pattern. Rapid expansion, technological singularity, transformation into collective consciousness, and then silence. Something has been stopping them, something that judges whether a species deserves to continue. The Great Filter, Professor Thalen breathed from his position as scientific advisor. The answer to the Fermi paradox. Ren nodded. Every species that achieves interstellar capability eventually faces the same choice: evolve through consumption or evolve through cooperation. Those who choose consumption face intervention. Those who choose cooperation are allowed to continue. General Crash finished, understanding dawning in his 4 eyes. The first Dawn faction that imprisoned their own kind. They weren't rebels. They were the ones who passed the test. And now it's our turn, Ren confirmed. The weakening dimensional barriers aren't random. They're scheduled. Every 50,000 years, developing civilizations face the return of a predecessor species. How they handle that crisis determines whether they're ready for the next stage of evolution. And we passed, Huscatel asked, his reptilian features showing skepticism. You chose cooperation over conflict, Ren replied. When faced with the first dawn, you didn't try to destroy them. You helped offer them redemption. 37 individuals from 9 different species risked their lives to save entities that could have consumed them. That's not the action of civilizations driven by conquest. She paused, letting the implications sink in. But the test isn't over. It never is. Every day, every choice, every interaction between species is part of the ongoing evaluation. The Epitaph operatives were placed not just to stop crises, but to observe, to see if the galaxy's species could overcome their base instincts. So we've been judged, Ambassador Talaria said slowly, by human children. You've been given the opportunity to judge yourselves, Ren corrected. We just provided the catalyst. The choices were always yours. General Kraj stood slowly, his massive frame drawing every eye in the room. My daughter told me something after the crisis. She said that true strength isn't in domination, but in the choice to protect. That humans understood this because they evolved on a world that could have made them monsters. But they chose to be something else. He looked directly at Ren. I spent my career believing that military might determine a species' worth. That conquest was the natural order. But you, a child who could have killed my warriors without effort, chose teaching over dominance. If that is humanity's gift to the galaxy, then perhaps we all have much to learn. The learning has already begun. Resonance added, 12 of my kind have requested placement in educational institutions across the galaxy. We, who were once gods, seek to learn what it means to be mortal, to contribute rather than consume, to teach rather than assimilate. The display shifted again, showing projections of possible futures. Cities where First Dawn entities worked alongside other species. Technologies that bent reality used for creation rather than destruction. A galaxy not united by force, but by choice. This is what Earth envisions, Ren said. Not humanity leading other species, but all species choosing to lead together. The First Dawn crisis wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. Proof that even the most fallen can choose redemption. That even gods can choose to be people. And if we refuse, Hescatel challenged, if we choose to continue our old patterns of competition and conquest, then you'll face the same choice the First Dawn did. Ren replied simply, evolution or extinction, unity through consumption or harmony through diversity. The universe doesn't care which you choose, but the consequences are always the same. Silence stretched through the room as delegates absorbed the magnitude of what they'd learned. Finally, Ambassador Teleria spoke, her harmonics carrying the weight of decision. The Novalian Collective formally requests expanded cultural exchange with Earth and the reborn First Dawn. We choose to learn. One by one, other delegations made similar declarations. Not treaties or alliances in the traditional sense, but commitments to something deeper, a recognition that survival meant more than military strength or technological advancement. As the formal session concluded, and delegates began breaking into smaller discussion groups, Zarakesh approached Ren. The Salkar princess moved with the same fluid grace as always, but something in her bearing had changed. You knew I would attack you in that combat evaluation, she said. It wasn't a question. Ren nodded. Your psychological profile suggested a 93% probability of testing the human when given the opportunity. The fact that you recruited others just confirmed you were taking it seriously. And you let it happen. I needed the galaxy to see that humans could defend themselves without destroying their attackers. That we had evolved past the need for dominance displays. Ren paused. Also, I was curious to see if you'd learn from the experience. Zarakesh laughed, a sound like crystalline bells. Learn that humans are terrifying. Yes, that lesson was received. Learn that strength without wisdom is just destruction, Ren corrected. You're one of the finest warriors of your generation, Zarakesh. But your greatest moment wasn't in our fight. It was when you volunteered to face the First Dawn. When you chose to risk everything for beings you'd never met. The Salkar was quiet for a moment. My father wants to nominate you for the Order of Valor, our highest military honor. I told him you'd refuse. Why would I refuse? Because medals are for people who see their actions as extraordinary. You see them as necessary, as choices anyone should make. Zarakesh tilted her head. That's what truly terrifies other species about humans. Not your strength or your Deathworld evolution. The fact that you see heroism as ordinary. That you expect everyone to be capable of transcendence. Ren considered this. Is that so wrong? Look around this room. 9 species choosing cooperation over conflict. First Dawn entities learning to be individuals. Your father questioning beliefs he's held for decades. Maybe we expect transcendence because we know everyone is capable of it. The eternal optimism of a Deathworld species, Zarakesh mused. Surrounded by predators, You chose to see potential allies. Faced with extinction, you chose to believe in redemption. What's the alternative? Ren asked. Assume everyone is an enemy. Live in fear of what others might do. That's not survival. That's just existence. Humans learned long ago that the only way to truly live is to believe others can be better than they are. Sometimes we're wrong, but when we're right... She gestured at the room full of former enemies, now planning a shared future. When we're right, we change the galaxy. Professor Thalen approached them, his crystalline form humming with excitement. Operative Epitaph 43, the First Dawn entities have made a request. They want to establish a joint research facility to study dimensional mechanics. Specifically, they want to understand how consciousness can exist across multiple dimensional states, without losing individuality. The next test, Ren murmured. Whether we can handle knowledge that could make us gods without choosing to become them. You think there will be more tests? Thalen asked. I think existence is a test, Ren replied. Every day, every choice, every moment we decide whether to be more than our base programming. The First Dawn faced it and initially failed. We're facing it now, and someday, we'll be the ancient civilization that future species discover. What will they find? Zarakesh wondered. Ren smiled, the expression carrying both hope and determination. That depends on the choices we make now, but I hope they find evidence that consciousness doesn't require conformity, that diversity is strength, that the greatest evolution isn't in power, but in wisdom. She looked at the gathering one more time, species that had been enemies now working together. Ancient gods learning to be mortal. A galaxy choosing hope over fear. I hope they find proof that even Deathworlders can choose life. The meeting continued late into the station's artificial night. Plans were made, partnerships forged, and slowly, carefully, a new chapter of galactic civilization began to write itself. Not in the language of conquest or consumption, but in the simple words of beings choosing to be better than they were. And watching from the observation deck, 142 other Epitaph operatives across the galaxy received the same encrypted message. Phase 1, complete. The galaxy has chosen wisely. Prepare for Phase 2. Because the test was never about stopping the First Dawn. It was about proving the galaxy was ready for what came next. The real evolution was just beginning,